In this week's FAS TV, we will be focusing on learning difficulties within the agricultural industry. We hear from farmer Alasdair McNab, currently Vice President of NFU Scotland, on his experiences of living with dyscalculia. Alasdair openly discusses the challenges he has faced as a farmer, in his career as a vet, and now in a social setting within his NFU position, and how he has learnt to cope and overcome some of the problems associated with having a learning difficulty. We also hear from Chris McVey, a welfare manager with RSABI, who highlights RSABI's involvement with Dyslexia Scotland to raise awareness of dyslexia through offering assessments to farmers to diagnose dyslexia and producing a video alongside a farmer living and farming with dyslexia. Chris also discusses how RSABI can help farmers who might be suffering from a learning difficulty.
Hi, I'm Alasdair McNab. I'm currently a Vice President at NFU Scotland, farming at the Kildare farm, which is just outside Dingwall on the south side of the town, opposite Dingwall Auction Mart. Dingwall Auction Mart, the farm they have, is where I grew up. And I've been a veterinary surgeon for most of my career, and between crofting and farming, that sort of filled in the spare time. And we've had pedigree sheep flocks in the past, and we've now got a pedigree limousine herd. Dyscalculia, or Dyscalculia, I'm never quite sure how you pronounce it, is an inability to process anything to do with numbers. As a sort of analogy, it's like dyslexia, where the processing of letters is difficult, it's the processing of numbers that's difficult. With numbers, I first became aware of issues with numbers in school, doing arithmetic and trying to get sense of numbers, and the sort of thing that I find a challenge is I would read a series of numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I would write it down as 1, 2, 3, 5, 4, 6 and be totally unable to see the difference. It became an issue as a vet, doing TB tests and brucellosis tests when you're reading ear numbers and writing them down. And the number of times I would get numbers wrong was quite amazing. It got me into a bit of trouble from time to time, because when you get reactors and folk will go back to resample them, they couldn't find the beast. We overcame that by discussion and identifying that if we had somebody else to write the numbers down, I could read it out. You put a thumb over one half of the number, read 3 or 4 numbers, shift it over and read the rest of the number, and somebody else write it down, mistakes go away. Numbers is a big issue. I and other folks suffering from this condition get very anxious when you're doing anything to do with arithmetic or calculations. Spreadsheets, surprisingly, have lifted quite a bit of anxiety in terms of manipulating numbers, but the anxiety is still there with filling in a spreadsheet. Dealing with money, calculating change is something which I just can't do mentally, and you're very grateful for these machines that calculate change. Something like 45 minus 18. I'm sorry, I need paper to do that. I can't do it mentally. You end up using fingers or other visual aids when you're counting. You lose track when you're counting. For example, counting sheep running down a race. Nah, can't do it. Counting cattle in the field, I need 3 or 4 goes to make sure I've got a consistent answer. Tracking budgets and are difficult. Doing my farm accounts is an absolute nightmare, and often have to get my wife to come in and check stuff when I can't get things to balance. I also do work for a company called Improve International, which assesses vets doing TB testing for the first time, and that involves a bit of calculation in terms of the difference between avian injections and bovine injections between days 1 and 3, calculating the difference and working out the result on a chart. And I often see vets struggle because they're trying to do the calculation mentally. I learned to cope with it by writing the answer down on the sheet and then putting a finger on one, putting a finger on the other on the chart and joining it up. So, that's how I cope with it. And I've had a quite traumatising experience with one young lady vet in an assessment, and I could see she was struggling. I recognised the issues, told her what it was, and we had a very emotional outburst. But a very grateful young lady that she now understood the problem, and we spent a long time talking about coping mechanisms. My wife regularly gets annoyed with me because time management is one of the big issues with dyscalculia, I have absolutely no concept of time, how long something takes. For example, I'm going to do a job, it'll take half an hour. An hour and a half later, I'm still not done. Or the other way around, a couple of hours to do this, and 20 minutes I'm finished. Calculating that sort of thing and having a concept of time is difficult. Calculating times and journeys, it'll take me 3 hours to get there and it takes 4. I'm notorious for being late for stuff. I mean, being late for things and not accommodating time is a classic sign with dyscalculia. And there's a standing joke around my friends that I'm going to be late for my own funeral. Anything to do with figures and calculations is the big issue. In veterinary practice, you're looking at using anaesthetics or medicines and calculating the dose rate. I struggled with that. Similarly with medicine, in-feed medication, calculating that, number of animals, weight of animals, daily feed intake, concentration and stuff, that sort of calculation is totally beyond me, and I coped with that before the company up, gave them the background details and they told me how to fill in the prescription. Social setting is quite embarrassing because retaining names and addresses and minor details in a rapidly moving social context is extremely difficult. In fact, I would say it's almost impossible to remember folks' names. I've also a tendency to drive too fast, and folk with dyscalculia will often drive too fast or too slow and think that's absolutely normal. The other key thing, and this is where my wife and I fall out, is I keep misplacing things around the house. I know that eventually I'll find out where I've left it, because I will go back around where I've been before and it's there somewhere. But if the key goes on the key ring in the wall, yes, okay, that's fine, but it's remembering to put it there because it is essentially a calculation. You've got to calculate, you're putting it there at that particular point in your trip. That's the difficulty. So there are several rows about what have you done with this, what have you done that, where is this, where is that. 3 warning signs. One is obviously mistakes in calculations in basic arithmetic, ability to count. The second one is time management. And the third one is having difficulty with charts and spreadsheets. These are the sort of 3 things that you'll recognise. In terms of diagnosis, the National Health Service isn't interested. It doesn't recognise it as a problem. There are online tests you can do, and they will give you a series of questions which are generally the same questions and cover the subjects I've been talking around just now. And as you go through it and answer the question, you suddenly realise, oh, that's me, that's me, that's me, that's me. And you'll get a score at the end of it, and generally anybody scoring 80% or more has a problem. And I generally will score 85 to 95%, which is the highest marks I've ever had in anything. As far as a proper diagnosis go, you have to go to a private psychologist. It's going to cost between £500 and £750 to get it done. But my suggestion would be, if the online test is telling you you've got a problem, then you've enough to start looking at developing coping mechanisms. The positives with dyscalculia are quite strong positives. You have an ability to solve problems with innovative solutions. Troubleshooting. You're the guy or person that gets sent in to sort things out. You're quite strong in art, music design, architecture. I find myself, I'll see plans of a house, 2-storey house, and I can visualise the whole thing in 3D, which vast majority of folk can't actually do, and they sit and wonder, how on earth can you work that out? But it's just second nature to me, that sort of thing. You're good at seeing the big picture, strategic thinking and holistic thinking, and taking a holistic approach to stuff. And these are sort of characteristics that aren't common in the population. A lot of it, I think, is to do your attitude to your issue. Issues can be overcome. You see plenty of folk there, like Paralympians with severe disabilities, pushing themselves to the limit. It doesn't matter what you've got. I was speaking to a young lad a couple of days ago, and he's got dyslexia, and he's letting it rule his life. I can't do this, I can't do that. I says, look, there are answers out there are solutions out there. And for example, he was saying, I can't use a mobile phone. And I says, right, okay, let's look at the technology available. And we discussed what's available with that, and he went away, and he's now spoken to his mother, and they're off into Inverness to look at the technology, using the mobile phone, using verbal interaction with the mobile phone rather than visual. Dyscalculia, you're looking at the issues here, the things you can't do. And for example, as I discovered, doing TB testing, you get someone to do the writing for you, and then you don't make mistakes. Obviously, you have to keep checking that they're not making mistakes as well, but you know, by and large, it works. And same, make it known in your workplace, your work colleagues, that you have this issue and that you will make mistakes with calculations. And what I've found in life, there's things that I have avoided doing, like the plague. And the biggest one for me is spraying, because calculating how much liquid spray goes into that tank at that concentration, how many litres does it pump out, and what's the speed of your tractor or your bike spraying it, so therefore how is it going to go on? And I have just not done any spraying. Even sowing, you know, what rate they set the machine at. Fertiliser spreading, I can see myself sitting in the tractor there for maybe 20 minutes just going over the calculations to make sure I've got it set right. These are the sort of challenges, and some of them you need help with, others you avoid, and others you learn how to cope with. I've reached this position in NFU Scotland, a position which I'm very proud of getting to, and it's bringing together a lot of the experiences I've had in life and bringing it to the benefit of the industry. This industry that we're in is full of folk with disabilities, because it's an industry that accommodates and copes very well with people with disability. And I spent a lot of time working in the government vet service, saw a lot of folk who were struggling at farming with disabilities, all sorts of things, and worked with them, resolved them, found coping mechanisms, and gave them that pride and dignity to keep on farming. And that's something I'm very pleased about.
My name is Chris McVey. I'm the welfare manager for RSABI, so it's my responsibility to manage the welfare team, so our case officers and our admin staff, to provide emotional, practical and financial support to those in Scottish agriculture. So our focus this year was on dyslexia, and according to Dyslexia Scotland, about 1 in 10 people in Scotland have dyslexia, but according to some research that Dyslexia Scotland did a number of years ago, with other farming organisations, they estimated that around 25% of farmers in Scotland have dyslexia, so a much higher proportion in the agricultural community as opposed to Scotland as a whole. And the issue that we find is that it's often undiagnosed, and that can be for a variety of reasons, but our particular focus, along with Dyslexia Scotland, was on over 40s, because what we tended to find in the feedback that we got was that when they were involved at school, that it wasn't taken seriously. So a lot of people were feeling that they just weren't clever, they weren't bright, they were maybe left to their own devices at school. So that's really why we decided to focus on the over 40s as well. We offer emotional, practical, financial support, so we offer a variety of support including free counselling, so very easy to get in touch with us. Very simple application process, people can access counselling. We offer short-term financial support if people are struggling with putting food on the table, paying their energy bills. We can look at their business situation as well, and in partnership with the likes of SAC Consulting and other consultants to access some business support for people. We can look at debt advice as well. And particularly for dyslexia, what we decided to do this year, based on a lot of feedback that we were getting from our welfare team, was that there was an element of people putting off their admin, putting off record keeping. They struggled with it. It was quite clear that they were falling behind in their record keeping. And the welfare team felt as though there was a wee bit more to it, especially because we knew that there was a high percentage of people in Scottish agriculture that could have dyslexia. So we had an initial discussion with Dyslexia Scotland and the type of help that we could maybe provide, and it was suggested that we offer assessments, particular to that over 40s category, because people would go through their life feeling like they weren't clever, although they maybe felt as though they weren't trying hard enough, and they weren't working hard enough, and they were making mistakes, they were getting frustrated, which was clearly having an impact on their mental health, their self-worth, their self-esteem very low, particularly because they had dyslexia, or that potentially had dyslexia, but they never knew. So we decided to introduce the assessments So it's usually about £500 for an assessment, but we're able to offer that free of charge, working with assessors all over Scotland. Very simple application process. We don't ask for screeds and screeds information, no long application forms. It's just a case of getting in touch, either through the helpline or on web chat or by emailing us directly, and case officer will get in touch, help you with the application, and then they will get in touch with an assessor in your local area and then take it from there. Clearly we speak to a lot of people who are struggling with paperwork, who are concerned about maybe inspections coming up or their cattle records falling behind, for example. And then we may get a call from somebody within the department who's wanting to make a referral to RSABI with the client's consent because they're needing a wee bit extra support. So we've had discussions with members at RPID as well about the type of help that they can provide. Their feedback was that they're there to help and to get in touch with your local office as soon as possible before it becomes a real issue. There's a sense that some farmers might be a bit put off with contacting a local office because they think that it might then mean that there's going to be an inspection or there's something more going on. But the feedback that we've had from RPID is that they're there to help. They're help to provide guidance and a bit of advice on the situation. And if you're feeling a bit concerned about contacting your local office, then please get in touch with ourselves, and then we can maybe help with that and making that contact with RPID as well. Recently we've supported people obviously with dyslexia assessments, and we supported an individual who unfortunately lost his partner recently, and the partner did all the admin stuff, all the paperwork, and he was more focused on the practical side of things, as farmers like to be. And this meant that obviously he didn't have that support there any longer, and the admin and the record keeping fell to the bottom of the pile. And through our conversations and the emotional support that our case officer was able to provide, we quickly determined that the potential was that he could have dyslexia. So at that time we were promoting our dyslexia assessment, and that individual was happy enough to be put forward for an assessment. And this year he was assessed, and they found that he did have dyslexia, and the feedback that he's given to our case officer was it was like a complete weight being lifted off his shoulders, that he felt as though he went through life feeling no that bright, no very clever, but now there was a reason that just the way that he interpreted things, the way that his brain worked was just different for other people, and he just needed a wee bit more support. So even just engaging with that assessor, he was able to pick up some tips and some techniques that he could use. So just something simple like what we all have the access on our smartphones that probably everybody has, and it's to have your emails read out to you. So he was spending a lot of time on his emails on his phone trying to decipher what was and what the content was. But just through a simple thing like having your emails read out to you, he can quickly know what's going on and then just move on with his day. When we decided to introduce the dyslexia assessment, the other key thing was then how do we promote it, how do we get farmers to reach out? And we knew that Pete Black for Colessi Farm in Fife had spoken about himself having dyslexia in this farm in life. So we felt that Pete was going to be a great spokesperson in order to encourage people to get in touch with us. And he spoke very openly during this farm in life. And we did a short video with him as well last year about dyslexia and his journey. And again, he was really open about it. And I think what Pete said resonated with a lot of people because it was exactly the feedback that we get for people, you know, and how they feel and what they go through. Like just that words were getting jumbled up. He was spending a lot of time in cattle ear tags and stuff like that, and just getting muddled up, and he always felt as though the way he processed things was just different. And then when he got that dyslexia assessment, again it felt like there was a weight lifted off his shoulders, but that it wasn't a sense that he was trying hard and he was working hard, but he had dyslexia, and it just meant that he just needed to work a wee bit differently and to do things a wee bit differently. And now that he knows the different techniques to use, the different strategies to use, he's able to get on with his day and just work to the best of his ability. So he was a great spokesperson for it. I would just again remind people that RSABIs there to support them as much as possible and really encourage people to get in touch. It's a completely confidential service. We've got a free phone number that's 24/7. People can get in touch on 0808 1234 555. We've also got web chat that's available on our website at www.rsabi.org.uk, and people can email us directly as well if they like, and we will get in touch, we'll discuss the situation and try and find the best way forward for that person. So no matter the issue, we're there to help as much as possible. So if people are still wanting to get in touch and discuss our dyslexia assessment grant, then we've got that open until 31st of March. So please don't hesitate to get in touch and give us a call on our helpline, through web chat, on our website, or by emailing us directly.
Hello everybody, just want to go through a few things for our March veterinary update. So it's early March, we're stood outside at Crichton Road Farm. We've actually got some cattle outside here now, which is nice to see. And I wanted to cover three things today. The first one is sheep related. One of the things that we're very busy with at the vet labs at the moment is looking at sheep abortion material ahead of the main lambing season, as it really starts to get going in earnest at the end of March into April. And common things are common. One of the common diagnoses that we're seeing is Campylobacter abortion at the moment, which is quite a challenging one. There's not a UK licensed vaccine for that particular disease, and it can be a bit challenging when we get these abortion outbreaks with Campylobacter as to know what to do with them when they occur. What I just wanted to pass on is a few sort of hints and tips about it, really, as things that might help. Firstly is to know that that's what it is. So if you're getting a run of abortions in your sheep flock right now, is get them investigated. Find out what the cause is, because then through your vet and with the help of your vet and your vet team, we can help you manage that as best you can. Second thing with any abortion, and particularly with Campylobacter abortion as well, would be is if ewes abort, is to try and isolate them from the rest of the flock as quickly as possible to make sure that any placentas or lambs are away from the pregnant sheep as quickly as possible. That's because the spread is basically an oral route, so it will be spread coming out in abortion material or possibly in fecal material, and then that is ingested. It goes then orally into the sheep and can reinfect more sheep. And we think that the infection, sorry, I'll say that again. We think that the incubation period is somewhere anywhere between a week and 3 weeks in terms of when an animal becomes exposed to this and when she might abort. So trying to minimize that spread is really, really important. We've seen a few outbreaks this year with sheep that are being grazed on either kale or turnips, and we wonder whether bringing sheep together, quite close together, being strip grazed, and also in maybe slightly dirtier conditions is a risk factor for it. So ahead of lambing, not only isolating any sheep that abort, but spreading sheep out as much as possible, trying to avoid bringing them close together and improve the hygiene around about is really, really important. A few other things to think about, feed troughs, particularly when they're not in use, is to turn them upside down to try and keep them clean. We wonder whether birds pecking at the remains of any feed that are in the feed trough is a way that it might be spread. So turning those upside down can really help. And if you're feeding sheep outside with troughs or with a snacker, is to try and change the area that they're fed every single day, so we're not getting any buildup of contamination in a particular area. So spreading the risk is really, really important, and that's something that I think can actually help. Coming back to one of my earlier points, getting a diagnosis and working with your vet and your vet team on this is really, really important. Thinking about any treatment strategies that might be worth considering for different causes of abortion, and also thinking about vaccine strategies for forthcoming seasons. One of the good bits of news, if you call it that, around Campylobacter abortion is that when they happen, usually is better the following year and the year after because the flock is immune. They build up quite a good bit of immunity to it in the first year. But that's not always 100% either, and I think we need to bear that one in mind. And there are vaccines that can be used, that can be imported on special license, that can be used to help control this disease in the future. So there's various things to think about in discussion with your vet. The next one we wanted to talk about, and it's not too late to do this if, depending on when your suckler calving season starts, is checking the metabolic status of suckler cows ahead of calving. It's something that we're doing quite a lot of at the moment with various different herds, and it always throws up really, really useful information. So one suggestion is that picking cows maybe 3 to 4 weeks ahead of calving as a minimum. Picking 6 cows to blood sample and really ask those cows what they think about the diet that they're being fed and the way it's being fed in the run-up to calving, so that we're just really asking them as a check on what they're feeling about what they're being fed and what implications that might have for the success of their calving and how they rear their calves. Picking half a dozen cows, perhaps across a range of body conditions, but all outwardly healthy, is the best way to go, and noting down their body condition score and some information about the ration that they're on really, really helps with interpretation of the results. But essentially with this, what we're checking on is the energy status of these cows ahead of calving, making sure that they're getting enough energy going into them, and particularly in relation to body condition. Checking the protein status of these cows to make sure that they're being supplied with enough protein to ensure that colostrum quality is good. Particularly checking some of the key macromineral statuses, so particularly magnesium levels of these cows ahead of calving. We know that magnesium can be limiting in quite a lot of the diets that suckler cows are fed, just to ensure that the mineral supplementation is as good as it could be, and if necessary, checking trace element levels as well. And it's rare to come across a circumstance when doing these checks ahead of calving doesn't provide some useful information, some things to change, perhaps some tweaks to the diet, some tweaks to how the diet is being fed, as well as what is being fed, that can help ensure that the calving that again is about to start works as optimally as it can. The final thing that I wanted to talk about today is really just a forward look to the next few weeks and months, either with growing lambs, with suckled calves that are turned out, or indeed with the type of cattle that's behind us here is freshly turned out dairy young stock, is the risk of coccidiosis. Cocci is a really, really common diagnosis, and basically every farm where we're keeping cattle or sheep will have cocci present, and will have some of the more pathogenic species of cocci present. So we're expecting our young lambs, our calves, whether they're suckled calves or dairy calves, to be exposed to these parasites either out at grass or indeed inside as well. And it's just how best we manage this. In an ideal world, what I would like these animals behind me to experience is that they slowly get exposed to tiny, tiny doses of coccidia. And if they do that, then they can manage that infection really, really well. They don't get any impact in terms of disease or poor production, and slowly they build their immunity to it over time, so that over time they become immune, and then they can deal with that like an animal would. And that's what we would like to happen, although it's a very, very unpredictable process, because we can't predict how much cocci they're being exposed to, when they're going to be exposed, and just keeping tabs on what's going on is really, really important. So a few pointers, certainly for suckler bred calves, the peak time that we would experience cocci disease is somewhere between 5 and 8 weeks of age. So batching up different groups of calves at different stages and monitoring cocci levels is really, really important for these calves. Discuss it with your vet as perhaps when to best put in place a treatment to try and manage the coccidial infection that's there, and if indeed a treatment is needed, when that is best targeted to. And always targeting a time when animals are experiencing a change or a stress, or they're coming up to that sort of 5 to 8 week window in the suckle calf situation is really, really a good time to think about dosing and discuss that with your vet. Particularly with dairy bred animals like these one behind us, we do see this phenomenon called post-turnout scour. Usually occurs about 2 weeks after they're turned out, and they meet a particular species of coccidia called Eimeria alabamensis. Don't worry about the fancy name. What you need to remember is that it's got quite a short life cycle and will give you scour and production issues, usually within a couple of weeks of them turning out and meeting the parasite for the first time and becoming exposed. So again, if you're seeing cattle that might be scouring, yes, it might be a diet change, yes, it might be a diet check, but always think about coccidiosis as something that we need to perhaps think about and perhaps control. There are plenty of drugs available that work in different ways, so it's worthwhile discussing that with your vet. A couple of things to remember about the drugs: none of them have any persistent activity, so they kill what's there today, but they don't then go on to provide any long-acting cover for an animal, which means the timing of it is really, really important. There's also no point in treating an animal if they've got a very, very low burden, because there's not much there to actually treat. And that's where, again, knowing the burdens, the challenges and the timings is really, really important. One other thing perhaps to remember on the suckler situation as well is that what we have seen on a few farms in the last few years is certain fields, certain paddocks, or even certain parts of fields obviously pose a massive risk as far as coccidiosis is concerned. The parasite can survive for certainly years in the environment and then re-emerge to cause challenges to animals. So one thing you can be pretty certain about is that if you've had a problem in a particular field or a particular part of a field in a previous year, there's likely to be quite high contamination and quite high risk for that particular part of the field in the years to come. So again, lots of things to think about with cocci. Like all of these animal health issues, discuss them with your vet. From an SRUC Vet Services point of view, we're available to help with diagnostics and support and advice, and let's hope for a happy and healthy turnout calving and lambing season.